What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update on Diablo 4 several months and a couple of seasons later, and not just that, but a rather recent acquisition. And while the game had a very solid, I would say, launch, it quickly found itself embroiled in problems due to its Season 1 patch that nerfed things significantly, which was not received well, which led to a bit of a rocky road. So naturally, we've got a lot to cover in terms of what this game has been up to the past few months, because I wanted to jump into Season 2 and check it out a little bit, because Season 1 launched right as my workload picked up. I have been going pretty much non-stop since July in terms of making videos about new releases, specifically Baldur's Gate 3, and I'm just now seeing the light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. And over the course of those few months, I have seen a few people here and there mention that they would like my opinion on this, because I've mentioned several times how important the Diablo franchise is to me, as it helped me get through a pretty rough time in my youth, which I've talked about in a few videos here and there. So I want to talk a bit about the past few months, a little bit about Season 2 specifically, and then we'll talk about the future. Though I do want to mention here towards the beginning of the video at least that, hilariously, while I had finally decided to jump back into Diablo 4 and check out its seasonal stuff, the launch of Season 2 I would not consider a smooth one. They actually had to delay the initial rollout by a few hours, and when they did get it running, much of the seasonal progression was initially bugged for a few more hours. So I couldn't even play it for like 7 or 8 hours after it was initially supposed to launch, though it did also bring itself to Steam at the same time. So the day got off to a bit of a rocky start. But that said, let's back it up a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, Diablo 4 had a very solid launch. It sold very well, most people were quite happy with it, and the problems didn't sincerely start until a few weeks later with the pre-Season 1 patch, which introduced a host of balance changes to the game for Season 1, as you might imagine. The problem is most of these were pretty extreme nerfs, and sorcerers and barbarians got the worst of it, with a quick version being that people had found some very fun overpowered builds in a video game about finding very fun and overpowered builds, to which Blizzard immediately went stop having fun, which I think is an inherent problem with a game that is always online, and thus having to seek some sort of balance. But we'll double back to that in a minute, because to give Blizzard some credit, I do think they addressed the backlash from this patch appropriately. Which is to say they took responsibility for it, admitted they made the wrong move, undid many of the changes, and laid a clear path forward about what and how they were going to address these things in the future. In terms of responses, it's really about as much as you could have asked for. However, the problem is the patch that fixed a lot of these changes didn't come until a few weeks after the initial patch rollout. And when you do that right at the start of the first season of a game that is effectively acting as a live service, it's gonna take a pretty big hit. And while they certainly haven't shown any charts or anything like that I could pull from, putting 2 and 2 together is pretty easy. They released a very deeply unpopular patch at what should have been one of their peaks in terms of player counts, and it didn't get fixed until weeks after the fact when most of that excitement was definitely gone. Though the patch that fixed those problems, patch 1.1.1 I believe, did also bring some interesting things to the game, like adjusting various quality of life measures on top of reducing the experience requirements for the later levels of the game to make it not feel so grindy, and to put their own words to use actually, they said they didn't want it to feel like a job. And again, credit where it's due, I think that was the right move. But that does bring us to Season 2. Season 2, or the Season of Blood, is obviously themed around Halloween, with it being all about vampires, giving us a small side story about a vampire lord rising up in the wake of the primevals being absent, let's say, and we're going to take the fight to them as they attack various areas around Sanctuary, which brings a host of new events and things to participate in. And while it might be a little campy, I admit, it is the Halloween season, so I didn't mind it so much. But before we start talking more specifically about the content here, I think probably the most interesting thing that Season 2 does in terms of the health of the game, if you will, is it introduced a host of quality of life changes. Specifically, the mount works much better now, it's a lot more responsive, it's faster, the cooldowns are lower, you get to use the mount more often, it can charge through barriers now, and after playing it for myself, I can honestly say the mount does feel better. And while it didn't bother me that much on launch, that was a big sticking point for a lot of people, and it was some fair criticism. On top of that, they made some changes to the way gems were acquired. Rather than carrying around a bunch of gems that were taking up inventory space in your stash or on your person, they reduced those to crafting materials, and now you can craft gems at the jeweler or salvage them to turn them into their subsequent materials. And this is a one-for-one thing. They're not shortchanging you on the salvage cost. Salvaging a gem gives you the material cost it takes to make that gem. So what this effectively does is removes gems from your inventory, but still gives you access to them. And things like that, on top of increasing the experience reward for many in-game activities, making doing those activities more streamlined, with Nightmare Dungeons now teleporting you just directly into the dungeon when you use one of their keystones. There's a lot of really good changes there that streamline the player experience. And that's to say nothing of the class changes. As they laid out in their previous sort of response that I mentioned, they put some of that action into play here, with the class changes being made here being targeted at underperforming specs and things that simply weren't being picked as often, and buffing those rather than nerfing the best people for effectively playing the game. With many of the changes being aimed at simply making those lesser chosen options more attractive to pick and providing interesting ways to play with those mechanics rather than just cutting the top off the best classes. And mostly they did this by messing around with the Paragon board and its key passives and how they interacted with different skills. To give an example from the Druid, the Thunderstruck Paragon passive now allows you to deal extra damage with your Storm skills that is 50% of the combination of two other bonuses you can pick up, which is another way that damage can scale in an interesting way. And to that end, they also changed exactly how a lot of unique items would roll certain stats and changed the gear portion of this as well, as obviously builds rely on gear just as much as Paragon and skills. And in an online game, that's about the best approach you could take, in my opinion, as I think just nerfing people for no reason, especially in a game like this, is never going to be received well. Personally, I would prefer the game just be offline, so things like this just didn't matter at all, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's talk about the Season 2 content because it is Halloween and I'm a little bit interested in what they've got going on here, as I will probably play this season throughout the holidays, as this one is going through, I believe, January 20th something, so this is going to be active for the next few months. And in that time, as we're chasing down the vampire Lord Zir, we get bitten by a vampire ourselves and start to develop vampiric powers. These form the crux of the new progression mechanic as part of the season that we can unlock and improve mostly through acquiring what is known as potent blood, a resource that drops off basically all the relevant content that you can spend to either unlock new powers or improve the ones you have. Though this is done a little bit randomly, both the resources and the powers were readily available. It didn't really feel like the game was time gating me behind anything besides playing the content. And that said, some of these vampiric powers are very strong, and they provide interesting alternatives to things we already do, and that's kind of what you want from a season. And obviously it's all themed around vampires and stuff, which is fun for the season, so overall I admit I'm enjoying it. But in terms of how you get that potent blood and some of the activities available to us, rather than a hell tide constantly moving about, we instead have zones that are affected by vampire attacks, and we have to go basically stop them, which can give us all sorts of rewards typical to hell tides, honestly, that include battling various tiers, if you will, of vampire minions that, in addition to giving us the potent blood, also drop packed gear. Packed gear is gear with certain modifiers that are required to activate your vampiric powers in their sanguine circle. Basically, in order to use vampiric powers, you have to slot them into a table of 5, and then in order for them to be active, you have to have the appropriate number of pacts on your gear. These vampire attacks will also drop item modifiers that allow you to adjust exactly what packs are on what gear, so this is also malleable, and making sure all of your vampiric powers are active wasn't really that hard. In addition to this, however, while we are fighting off these vampiric minions, we will be earning Vampire Hunter acclaim, so to speak, which can lead to extra rewards from a reward board as we move up the tiers of vampire hunting, which can give you access to caches of new potential loot, giving you another method of gear progression. And then, as with any season really, we have our season's journey. This is a series of challenges and objectives broken up into chapters that encourage you you to see various portions of the game and season's content that will then provide you tangible rewards via things like legendary aspects to affix to your gear, more caches of loot, and unique rewards dedicated to the specific chapter of the season journey you're finishing, and favor. Favor is where the monetized portion of this comes in, because this is how you earn progress towards a battle pass. In order to make money off this seasonal content, Diablo 4 has implemented a battle pass system, which we all knew about, but this is my first time actually playing it for myself, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Currently, this is all cosmetic. Buying a battle pass will give you the better cosmetics, though there is a free version available that will give you more simple rewards, but only like a fifth of what is totally available. Now, if you pay for the battle pass, you'll earn all these extra fancy cosmetics and things, which is obviously how they're bankrolling this content drop. And as I mentioned in my review of this game, I don't like this system, but it's also not particularly offensive to me either. As long as they keep this purely cosmetic and it stays that way, I could care less. There's nothing stopping you from enjoying the season outside of these cosmetics, even if you don't pay for the battle pass. You can even get a lot of cool rewards otherwise, so I won't pretend it's some huge deal to me, but I will say I do find its inclusion just generally distasteful, especially in a game that costs $70, and also did insane sales for this company. And that kind of brings me to talking about the future of this game, and a little bit about Blizzard with their recent acquisition by Microsoft. So in terms of an update since this game's launch and subsequent tumultuous summer, I would say Diablo 4 has done pretty much what I expected it to do and mentioned in that review. Because it's always online and it lacks an offline mode, this game is effectively a live service title. And as such, we are at the mercy of Activision Blizzard, who can at any time make changes or fully alter even the only cosmetic nature of their current battle pass system to anything they want. And while they certainly have to keep in mind player numbers, I'm just not wild about a franchise I love so much being associated with things like paid battle passes, online-only modes, live service models, and it's really disappointing to me that the ARPG genre as a whole has pretty much gone that way. Especially since Diablo 4 is fun for me. I enjoy a lot of the combat, I enjoy a lot of the systems at play, I enjoy playing this game. I think Season 2 is fun even. It also got off to a very bad start, as I mentioned in the earlier portion of the video, but still, I'm enjoying what I was able to actually play of it. But that's just it. Every time I go to enjoy this game, I am reminded that at literally any point, that could go up in smoke, and it feels ridiculous to spend time on it as a result, which is why I really want that offline mode, because Diablo 2 is an important game to me. It's installed on my computer right now. I can fire up a version of it that I enjoy that is pre all the D2R changes and buffs and everything, and I also have D2R on my computer if I want to play that version too. And I can do that because Diablo 2 has an offline mode, which means I can enjoy that game how I want to enjoy it and not how the devs have decided I have to enjoy it, as we got a front row seat to with all those nerfs to fun builds that they made. And while they walked a lot of that stuff back and they said all the right things, that does little to assuage people's distrust for a company that has a horrible track record with trust. So to say it very plainly, I simply do not trust Blizzard in this regard, even if I'm having a good time with the game now. But we're not done yet, because that is where the Microsoft acquisition comes in. Just this past week, Activision Blizzard was acquired by Microsoft, so how does that affect anything? Will there be any substantial changes to their games or the models and approaches with which they are made? And obviously a lot of that stuff remains to be seen. But my point is the chance for change is there, and I would like to see some made. So to sort of wrap this video up, I'm gonna throw a Hail Mary of sorts. You see, back in 2021, I reviewed a small CRPG called Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. Arcanum was made by a lot of developers who now work at Microsoft. However, the rights to the Arcanum series are actually owned by Activision, and now by Microsoft again. But I mention that because in my video for that game, I mentioned that an Arcanum sequel was all but impossible, unless something crazy happened, like Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, and I made that video less than 6 months before that was announced. So I'm going to throw this in here and hope for a round 2 in that regard. Blizzard, and as a whole now Microsoft, would be able to sidestep most of the complaints about Diablo 4 if they would implement an offline mode that allowed people to install the various previous versions of the game before changes were made. And I know this is possible because I've seen other games do it, but if Microsoft were to, say, impose this model on them, I think they would save themselves a lot of headache, because then they would be able to go, here's an offline mode for people like Mortismal who won't shut up about it, and if you enjoyed playing the game as that version, here it is, play to your heart's content. But if you want to do the cool new seasonal stuff we're doing, that's where the online multiplayer comes in, and if you want to get the most out of that, like the cool cosmetic rewards, here's a battle pass that'll help us keep the servers on. And then, ta-da, you've managed to functionally respond to every major complaint. And while I certainly don't think that would happen, with the way Microsoft is trying to farm goodwill these days, maybe they would consider giving it a go. So there it is at the end of the video. But to summarize, the last few months and updates with Diablo 4 have pretty much confirmed my fears about it with the review. While they certainly haven't done anything like implement pay-to-win mechanics, things like that, they have proven that due to patches and balancing, this game is going to be all over the place because it is effectively a live service game. But for me, at the end of the day, this is a franchise that means so much to me, and just seeing it littered with this always online, the battle pass stuff, it's a real bummer. I don't know how else to put it. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the game, because I do. I suppose I just wish that enjoyment didn't come with the requirement of having to trust a company I simply do not trust. So in the end, I suppose over the next few months, starting in probably like 2024, being realistic, we shall see what changes, if any, Microsoft brings to the table, because I sincerely hope 20 years from now I can fire up a game of Diablo 4 offline the same way I've done with Diablo 2 for the past 20 years. But that is pretty much going to do it for this video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe. By all means, let me know what you think about all this down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.